Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of NLP with Friends. We're really happy to see all of you here. And we are very excited that today we have Nitika Mathur with us, who is an awesome PhD student at the University of Melbourne, working with Trevor Korn and Tim Waldron on machine translation evaluation. And we're going to turn it over to her in just a second. But some brief housekeeping before we get started. So we'll be using Dory to collect questions, and you should have received a link with the Eventbrite email. If you have an urgent question during the talk, which you need to get answered for your understanding going forward, you can click raise hands in the participants panel, and we'll be monitoring that. But otherwise, we'll be having the Q&A session mostly at the end, and hopefully we'll be able to have a nice discussion. When using Dory, if you want us to call on you so you can ask your question, please give a name on Dory and make sure you're in the Zoom room during the Q&A session. Yeah, and if you face any issues during the talk, you can private message the host, who's me, or Liz Salesky, who's also in the call, or you can send an email to nlpwithfriends@gmail.com. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us. And we now give the floor to Nitika Mathur, who will be telling us about Tangled Up in BLEU, reevaluating the evaluation of automatic machine translation evaluation metrics. Thanks, over to you, Nitika.
Okay, let me quickly share my screen first. From beginning. Zoom meeting, share screen, share. Slideshow, share. There we are. Can you see the slides?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Let me. Okay. So first of all, thank you for Abhilasha and Liz and everyone for organizing this series, and Abhilasha especially for inviting me to give a talk here. Thank you to everyone for attending, and to those who are listening to the recording because you could not because of time zones, then I'm happy you're listening to the recording, and if you have any thoughts that you want to share or any questions, then feel free to ask. So with that, let's get started. Today I want to talk about machine translation evaluation, and in particular using automatic metrics to do this. So what we have is our MT systems that are translating from one language to another, and we want these MT systems to get better, and or we want, like, we've made some change to our MT system, and we want to know if this change improves the quality, or we want to compare our system with somebody else's system. And so we need good, reliable evaluation. So the best way to do this, even now, is to use human evaluation, where you ask people what do they think of this evaluation, except that this is time consuming and expensive, and so we've developed proxies where we have our little metrics that compare our MT systems with human translations and give us a score of how good our translation is. And now, if we are using this as a proxy, the question is, how good is this proxy? And so typically we evaluate this using the Pearson correlation of our metric scores with our system scores with human scores on the same set of systems. So this development and validation of metrics is spearheaded by the annual metric share task at WMT. And shout out, I'm organizing it this year, and looking, and if you have like submit your metrics. Okay, so this is I mean, we kind of know that BLEU and other metrics are biased against rule-based systems. But in the last few years, we've seen the emergence of neural systems, and rule-based systems have kind of gone away from WMT, and we see really high correlations. So what we see on this slide here is the correlation of BLEU with all of the language pairs in WMT 2019. And the Pearson correlation seems to be really high. In most cases, above 0.9. But, and so you would think 0.9 is a good correlation, right? So if I ask you, and this is what I thought, like, let us imagine human scores versus metric scores, where the metric scores have a correlation of 0.9. Think of what the scatter plot would look like. You would think of something like this, where your metric scores are, they're like normally distributed about the best fitting straight line. But Pearson correlation is like, it's just one number, and this one number could represent this very expected distribution of scores, or there could be other patterns that are hiding in the data. And so if you just report this one number, then you are missing important aspects of the data. So the findings of WMT 19 indicate the presence of two such patterns. The first is outliers. So you have some empty systems that are, let's say, much worse than the rest of the systems in the cohort. And the presence of these systems can have a high leverage, in the sense that if your metrics score these correctly, then they will have a big influence on Pearson, and we end up with really high correlations. So this can happen. I mean, if the rest of the systems are also if your metric is scoring the rest of the systems well, then it doesn't make a difference because you have high correlations anyway. But it's possible that if your metrics are making errors in evaluating the rest of the systems, having these outliers is going to give you a high value of correlation anyway. So the second pattern that the organizers of WMT found is this phenomenon called heteroscedasticity. And what this means is that the variance of the errors around the best fit line increases as, in this case, the quality of our metrics, of our MT systems gets better. So we have low variance, so our metrics are really good when our MT systems are not so good, and as our MT systems get better, then we have really high variance and our metrics are making more errors. So the trouble with having this is that the correlation of the whole set of systems is going to be too low when you are looking at these systems, and it's going to be too high when you are looking at these systems. So it's kind of presenting a misleading idea of how reliable our metrics are. So in this talk, I'm going to first look closer at these conclusions. So I'm going to first look at the influence of outliers on correlation, and then look at how MT system quality affects metric reliability. And then finally, let us go back to where we started, which was we want to compare two empty systems. And Pearson's great in giving us how good the trend is, but it's kind of not really helping us understand what's happening at this granularity of a couple of systems or a small set of systems. So for that, we're going to step back and look at how much we can trust metrics when we compare any two empty systems, and how often do they agree with human judgments. So at the end of each section, I'm going to stop for questions, and I want to make sure that everyone's understood everything before we move on. And if you have any open-ended questions, then let us talk about that at the end of the talk. So let us get started. Well, before we get started, these are the metrics I'm going to be looking at. So we begin with BLEU and PER, which are computing similarity over words. BLEU is n-grams, PER is edit distance, and these, I think, and then we move to CHRF, where we are looking at n-grams over characters instead of words, so we are able to better capture morphological variation. So these three are lexical metrics, and I think if you look at recent papers, they are dominated by BLEU, and there are some papers that are including PER or CHRF results as well. And then we move on to GC1 and ESIM, which were the metrics that performed best in the WMT19 metrics task. And both of these are based on contextual embedding. So we're both using BERT, and GC1 is a formula on, and ESIM is a trained metric, which is learning sentence embeddings. And finally, we're looking at EC2, which is same as EC1, except that we are comparing directly with the source instead of the reference. And so we're using cross-lingual word embeddings for this. So let us look at the influence of outliers. So first, what we see here is the distribution of human scores for English to German. And you can see most systems have a score in this range, but there are two systems here which are whose quality is a bit lower than the majority of the systems, and we identify these as outliers. So the outlier detection method we use is based on the median and the median absolute deviation. And so this is a more robust alternative to using the mean and the standard deviation. So we are basically identifying systems that lie away from the median. And for details, look at the paper. So what's happening? Let us look now at metric scores. And you can see that all three of these metrics have, so this is BLEU, VC1, and VC2, which is the source-based metric. And all of them have, when we're looking at all the systems, then they all have a correlation of above 0.9, and BLEU and EC1 are like 0.97 and 0.99. So you think they're pretty close, except when you get rid of these outliers, what you find is that the correlation of BLEU, so we're looking now only at these systems, drops to 0.81. The drop in VC1 is a lot smaller, so we're going from 0.99 to 0.92. And then this is the most dramatic drop over here for EC2, because when you get rid of this outlier, what you find is that there is no relationship at all between the metric and human scores. And let us now drill a little bit more and see what else. So here what I'm doing is so here's our distribution of scores again. And if we have 22 systems, and if I want to sample, say 10 systems from these 22 and repeat this 1,000 times, what is the correlation? If my sample includes this outlier, what you can see is that doesn't matter what other systems you have really high correlations. And if your sample does not include this one and includes the second outlier, then there's a little more variance in the scores. But then when you get rid of both of these outliers, then you can clearly distinguish between BLEU and say ESIM and EC1, where you can see that the correlation of our samples of these semantic metrics is a lot higher than BLEU. So let us come back to our chart, which is looking at the correlations of WMT19. This is BLEU, what we've seen before. This is EC1, which was the winner, arguably the winner of the shared task. And maybe you'd say, it's not that much different, is it? But then when you remove outliers and recalculate the correlation, you see a bigger drop in BLEU compared to EC1. And so now you can kind of more clearly see that EC1 is more highly correlated with human scores than BLEU. Okay, so that's it with outliers. Any questions so far?
So we have a question from Vivek Gupta.
Yeah.
Vivek, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
So I see at some of the, like in the current plot, at some places the BLEU and the score even improved. So
Yes.
why could that could be happening?
Yeah. So what happened here is that if your metric is wrong with scoring your outliers, then if you get rid of this outlier, then your correlation will increase, which is why I would not say, let's just get rid of all the outliers and report scores only with the remaining systems. What I want to do is report scores for all systems as well as with outliers. So this is Gujarati to English language pair. And there was this one system that got really bad human scores, but we had some metrics. I think most metrics except CHRF gave it higher score than the next best system. And so what you end up with is a lower correlation when you have all systems and higher when you remove this outlier. Got more questions?
So the next question is from Huang. Huang, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Huang?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, thanks. Okay, I have two questions, very quick ones. The first one is that um, does it mean we shouldn't use person correlation?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Okay, so we have two things. The first thing is that we have the evaluation metric, and the
Yeah,
second thing is that we have the correlation score. And it seems
yes.
like the correlation score is really how to say, it changed a lot if we have outlier. So shouldn't we use other scores instead of specimen score, something like
Right.
that?
Yes. Um, I think there's like pluses and minuses with different ways of evaluating metrics. So this is using Pearson, and the good thing about Pearson is that it is taking into account the differences in scores when you are computing the correlation. You could instead use something like Spearman, which is only looking at ranks. You could look at Candletown, which is looking at pairs of systems. And all of these have their advantages and their disadvantages. So this is using correlations. The other thing you could look at it in other ways, and I think one way to look at it, I'm gonna present in the third part of this talk. And there's something else that we are thinking of for the WMT20 metrics task, which we don't quite have the details yet. So if we can iron that out, then we'll use that. So stay tuned.
I see. I have another very quick question. Could you go back to the
Yeah,
previous slide? The previous one.
the previous slide, give me a sec.
Not this
This one?
one. No, not this one.
This one?
Yes, this one. A very
Okay.
naive question. So what is the
Yeah.
exactly the blue line here for it?
That's just the best fit line between the human score and the metric score. So if you run a linear regression, then
Ah, I see. I see.
this
Thank
is
you.
the line. So you're kind of saying that if your points are away from this line, then your metrics not doing a good job at scoring that system.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Uh, let us go back to Zoom meeting. I seem to have.
So if anyone else has a clarification question, you can use your raise hand functionality in Zoom. Otherwise, we move on. Okay, I think we don't have more questions at this point.
Okay. So actually, before we do that, let me quickly go here. Okay, can you see the screen with the Chrome window with the PDF? So here, at the second row, you can see that Gujarati to English, and what you get is that this outlier here, that BLEU is scoring wrong, and giraffe is like the only metric that is scoring that correctly, giving it a low score. Okay, let us go back to our okay, so the next question was how much does metric reliability, how much is this influenced by the quality of the MT system? So what they did at WMT19, the organizers of the shared task list. So Before this, we've had some kind of qualitative evidence that our metrics are making errors when they are evaluating good systems. And so what they did was they said, okay, we have, let's say, 22 systems in the English to German shared task. So when you take the correlation of all 22 systems, you have a really high number. What happens if you start removing the worst systems? So if you, like this number here is the correlation of looking only at the top 18 systems and then the top 14, top 10. And as you decrease the number of systems, so you're restricting only to the best few systems, this very dramatic decrease in correlation. So it's kind of suggesting that your metrics are getting worse and worse as the quality of your MT systems get better. But for me, the trouble with this is that you are evaluating something with just half of the range. Like if you are at this point here, then instead of looking at the full range, you're just restricting it to fewer and fewer systems. It's not quite valid to compare across the full range with correlation with only a part of the range of systems that you have. And so what I thought was maybe what we should do is, instead of changing the sample size across every point, let us keep that sample size constant. So let us, so the green line is with the sample size of 4, and the black dotted line is the sample size of 8. So what we see here, let us look at the green line. So this is the worst 4 systems. This is the next, and so on until you get to the best 4 systems. And now you don't see that very dramatic green line, decrease anymore. What you see is that the correlation is fluctuating. And so with some set of systems here, it's the correlation is negative, it's getting better, it's going down again, it's going up again. And maybe sample size of 4 is too small. Let us look at a slightly bigger sample size of 8. And here the correlation is not going up and down as dramatically anymore. But what you see is that the smallest correlation is kind of in the middle of the range, not at the best 8 systems or the worst 8 systems, but somewhere in between. And I think then this is English German. So let us repeat this thing with all of the other language pairs, and I don't see any consistent trend anymore where you have that very consistently decreasing trend or consistently decreasing in the middle, or so the pattern's not constant anymore. And so this is like saying that your metrics can make errors anywhere. It doesn't, not necessarily only with the best systems, but your metric errors are pretty much sprinkled throughout the range of quality. And let me go here. So this is just saying that maybe if we had more systems, then maybe so this is only the systems in WMT19, which I'm probably assuming that the worst system of 2019, maybe if you discard the outlier, is probably better than the best system of, say, 10 years ago. So maybe if we had a consistent human evaluation for a lot of systems across a big range of quality, then we can see such a trend. But right now, having just the small sample size of 15 or 20 systems is not really giving us much data to conclude this. So when I introduced this, I used the word heteroscedasticity. And so then I went to Google and I said, okay, how do people test for heteroscedasticity? And there were a bunch of tests. So the most simple one was saying, let us look at the variance. So let me, I'm not very organized here, sorry. So if we go back to our scatter plots, then if the variance, so we are now looking at the error terms. So if the variance of the errors is smaller over here and bigger over here, so if that depends on the quality of the empty system, then we can say yes, our metrics do get worse as empty system quality increases. And so none of these statistical tests were able to give me a conclusion of yes, there is evidence of this. And I think that is because of low sample size. So so this is where we are looking individually at each language pair. So maybe if there are any statisticians out there who can figure out how to combine data from multiple years or multiple language pairs in a principled way, maybe we can do this analysis properly and see if there is evidence for this. So if you know any of these, then talk to me later. And let me stop for questions. And while I'm here, let me show here. So this is for all language pairs. So you can kind of see that when you look at our green lines and our black lines, the trend is not constant. So it goes up, it goes down with some language pairs. It's all good. And with some language pairs, you do see this trend and so on. So there's no consistent trend. Okay, questions?
If anyone has any questions, you can use the.
I see a raised hand. One.
Yeah, sorry for asking to. Could you go back to the slide that you opened?
Yeah.
It's interesting that I can only unmute if I raise my hands. So it.
Oh.
Yes,
Is this the slide you're looking for?
Yes. So I have two
Yeah.
questions. The first one, my apology. Could you explain again the rolling windows of n? Somehow I get lost about that. Sorry.
Right. So here, let's say n is 4. So this point here is the correlation of the worst 4 systems. So of rank 22 to 18. And then the next point here is systems of rank 21 to 17. And then the next point is rank 20 to 16 and so on. So this point here would be systems of rank 14 to 10. This point here would be systems of rank 10 to 6.
I see.
And this is gonna be the best for so rank 4 to 1.
I see.
So we're keeping the sample size constant, and I think it makes more sense to keep that instead of having a different sample size for each point.
I see. Okay, that explains my question. My second question as well. I'm just curious for the top 4. Please correct me if I was wrong, because they are good. The top 4 is very hard to distinguish between them. Which one is better? That's why the correlation is so low. Is it correct?
That is the idea. Yes.
Thank you.
And there's, I guess, one more thing that's here is that these systems are really close. They might be. I think that's what's happening here. That if the systems are all having very close
Close is what
quality,
means, because when you look at the BLEU score in the previous slide, it's quite
yeah.
different, right? Yes, you see
Uh,
that? You see the metric score is
yeah,
just quite different? No, okay. Okay, not that different. Yeah, okay, I was wrong about that.
yeah, and I guess if you eyeball this here, you can't really say that
I see.
there's more error here or there's more errors here. It all looks about the same. This, like, if you go all the way here, then here it's a bit more clear to see that there's more errors here than over here. And I can't quite see that pattern here. So if you yeah, so I guess I'm not saying that it is definitely not true, but I can say that I did not find any empirical evidence of that in the WMT19 data.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so far what we've done is we have looked at correlations, and the trouble with correlation is that it is giving me a trend. So it's saying that maybe the way you can kind of justify using Pearson, at least in my mind, what I think of is that maybe if we have a high correlation, then if we keep optimizing for BLEU, maybe BLEU makes errors here and there, but if you keep selecting systems that improve on BLEU, you will end up improving on human scores as well. Whereas if you have a metric like this, so if you keep getting better at this metric, so maybe you start here and you keep getting better at this metric. Sorry, this is the metric score line. So if you keep getting better at this metric, it's not really improving over human score. So if you have a high Pearson, then as you optimize on that metric, the more likely you are, sorry, the faster progress you make on human scores. So this is kind of giving us the long-term view. But in the short term, what we are doing is we are saying, okay, we want to select between, say, system architectures, between two different architectures. We want to say, I've made an improvement over my system, which system is better, or I want to say, hey, look, I have the state of the art now compared to the previous best system. And so we are kind of making decisions on two systems, and sometimes these decisions are really important. So am I going to put this system in production, or am I going to submit this paper to ACL, or if you are a reviewer, then am I going to accept this paper? So knowing Pearson is not really giving you an insight into what's happening as to how much you can trust your metric when comparing with a pair of systems. So this is the scenario we have. We have two systems, and we know what the BLEU score difference is. So from this, what can the human score difference be? So that is the question I asked, and there were multiple iterations of this. So I first started by thinking, okay, let us just say, how often do humans agree with blue? And so that was kind of like giving me an accuracy score. And then I thought, hang on, does this depend on what is the difference in blue scores? So then what I had was, if my blue score difference is say between 0 to 1.5, then what is the accuracy of, like how often is blue right, where compared to if your blue score difference is say greater than 5. But again, that wasn't quite giving me the full picture, because this was ignoring the difference in human scores. So maybe blue says system A is better than system B by a small margin, and humans say, no, it's the other way around, or something like that. So then if human score difference is also really tiny, then maybe this is a different scenario compared to if blue score is really large. So this is the kind of plot I ended up with, where I have, so each point here is a system pair, so a pair of systems, let's say system A and system B, and I've binned each system based on their metric difference. So the top row here says that blue says the two systems are similar, then the difference is not statistically significant. And then this is a small blue difference, and this is a large blue difference of greater than 12 points. And then for each of these systems, I plotted the human score difference. And finally, the colors are whether humans think that it is that this difference is statistically significant or not. I guess before I proceed, does this explanation of what these dots are, does that make sense?
Very quick question. So you ask human to evaluate every sentence, and you plot the dot here for every sentence, or you ask many humans to evaluate a single test set, and each person is a dot here?
So each dot is a pair of systems. So we have, for example, so this is combining all the language pairs of WMT19. And what we have is the human evaluation, where humans are giving a score to every system. So what we saw earlier, for example, was English German, where we had 22 systems, and we had humans give a score to each system. And the way we compute these human scores is that we have many people giving a score to each sentence in the test set, and the system score is the average of scores of the sentences. And so then when you take two systems, you can compute the statistical significance of the score difference based on
difference between every pair of systems. Is it correct?
Yes.
Okay, I see.
So ideally, what we want is that if blue score says that the two systems are not significant, then humans agree with that. Or even if humans give, say, no, the two systems, there is a difference, that the difference is small, so something that's inside this rectangle. Other way around, if blue says, yes, one system is better than the other, then ideally we want humans to agree with that. And I guess the other thing we want is that as the blue score difference increases, the difference in human scores should also increase. And you can see that this is true for a lot of systems.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, but we also have systems here where humans are giving a large score difference. So humans are saying that system A is definitely better than system B with, say, this big margin over here, or with this big margin here, but BLEU cannot find any difference in these systems. The other thing is, let's look over here. You have these large BLEU score differences. So like over here, for example, you have a BLEU difference of 5 points or even more than 7 points. And for these systems, you still have some systems where humans say, nope, the two systems are similar, or they say, hang on, it's the other way around. So I think these, again, is not what you would like. And finally, when you look over here, so this is the kind of, so typically, if you look at research papers or things like that, you see these small BLEU differences. And when you look at comparing at the range of human score differences, it's almost saying that, I mean, that your BLEU is a bit random, or it's, I guess, not having a lot of value to say, hey, my system is better than your system with a BLEU difference of 1 point or a BLEU difference of 2 points. Because so many of those systems, humans actually disagree and say, no, the two systems are similar, or they say, no, it's the other way around. So this was BLEU. What's happening with other metrics? So this is BLEU compared to EC1. And you see a lot fewer red dots here. You see a lot fewer blue dots here and here. So it's making fewer errors, but ultimately, there's still enough errors that if you have to pick a threshold to say, hey, if my metric score difference is greater than this cutoff, then we can trust this metric. So if you have to pick that cutoff, then that cutoff has to be unreasonably large to the point where it would be hard. Like if you decide that we're only going to publish a paper if your metric score difference is, let's say, greater than 5, then you wouldn't have many papers submitted at all. So that's all of that. Questions?
Did you ever see a system that is better, like 7 BLEU score, but it actually works? Like
Yes.
It's hard to believe,
It's a bit crazy, right?
Yeah.
Or the other way around, where BLEU cannot find any significance, any difference between the system here, which has such a large human score difference.
Oh, I see.
So you have errors in both directions, and I think both of them are pretty a bit scary to see that we use this metric.
I see.
I think there was someone else who raised their
Yeah,
hand.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
one thing I was thinking is like, aren't you putting too much information in a single point? Basically, like, because I think in that discussion there was like, it's basically average over all data set, all language pairs, kind of for
Yeah.
two system. So won't it be like unjustified, like having like maybe there is a system which work well for some kind of language, some language pairs, and there may be other system who work on some other kind of, how you are comparing like average of across two different languages and two different data sets by a single point, like a single score for two system for every language pairs. Can we have this
Uh,
plot separately for every language pair or something, like for every system, and then come with some metric or something?
I think, so basically this point here is you are taking two systems for the same language pair.
Okay.
But your question about having a separate plot for each language pair, you could do that. That would just be a lot of plots for you to look at.
Yes, that's
And
true.
I mean, if you're doing that, I would actually prefer to have scatter plots over each language, so each language pair, because
Okay.
this is losing some information. Like, you could have a scatter plot for each language pair, but I think this is a good way to combine all language pairs so you can see everything in one plot.
Okay.
I think his question can be rephrased like, does it happen for only several language or does it happen for all language? If we put everything here, we cannot tell, right?
Right. Actually, that's true. So with some language pairs, metrics have really high correlations and maybe make no errors at all or very few small errors. And there are other language pairs where metrics make a lot of errors and have a lower correlation. So I think um, the trouble is that if a metric does really well across one language pair this year, it doesn't mean that the metric is going to do well next year as well. So if you look across the years of WMT, you have some language pairs that have stayed constant. And so for that same language pair, 1 year BLEU does well, 1 year it doesn't. And so it's, I would say you can't really make a conclusion that BLEU is good for this language pair based on 1 year's data.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. This is Abhilash here. So,
Mhm.
hi. So, actually, I had a couple of questions. So, first of all, like, it's a follow-up to what we were just discussing just now. So, like,
Yeah.
has there been any sort of analysis on what sort of language pairs belong to these red dots, or like, kind of to say, like, yeah. So, basically, coming to the red dots, has there been any kind of analysis on what sort of languages give this reverse trend as compared to the human like, yeah, so
Uh,
like,
I
in
guess
what language pairs does this trend of BLEU scores, like, kind of being a proxy for human difference, I mean the human scores, that proxy breaks? So is there...
I think the only thing I can say is that it's more likely that the language that the translations out translated in English. So if you were evaluating something in English, so comparing English translations and English references, it's less likely to make errors, but it still does. And again, as I said, I don't really want to say that it was language because you have this kind of variation across the years.
Right. Okay, and one more question here is like, it's a little silly question out here, but however,
That's
for especially the EC plot, if I'm pronouncing that right,
yeah.
it seems to be following some sort of a power law. It's like totally bizarre to think, I guess, I don't know. But is there anything in research which corresponds to this, or is it just appearing like that? Like, I was just asking.
I mean, as I said, ideally you want your human score differences to shift in the right as your metric score differences increase as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of following that in a way that's better than BLEU, but I haven't really thought of
Okay, sure, no problem. And I guess, yeah. Actually, one more question regarding, yeah. So, regarding basically, like, not very much aware regarding the EC metric, but like regarding the BLEU score. So, is it that, sorry, it's a follow up question to my previous one. So, is it that languages which, like, BLEU score is based on basically matching n grams, right? So,
Yeah.
is it that languages which do not have much vocabulary in them tend to kind of not, like, the systems are not able to learn those properly, due to which it is not able to reproduce the exact engrams as that in the what is the desired prediction? So I mean the target whatever is there for the translation purpose. So is it that the I mean, again, I don't know whether it's very much relevant or not, but I was just asking if these out of kind of distribution, like this red dots, maybe represent those kinds of languages.
Not necessarily. There's a bunch of red dots here that correspond to English German. The thing is that because this language pair is the language is the same for both systems, if BLEU is disadvantaged because of that, it's affecting the two MT systems equally. It's not like it's an advantage for one MT system and a disadvantage for the other in terms of the language. I'm not quite sure I understand your question, but I think that should have the same influence for both the language pairs.
Oh, actually, sorry, is it that both the like all the points correspond to the same language pair? I may have got it.
So each point is a system. So for example, there are two systems in, they're both translating from English to German, or maybe these 2 points are both systems that are translating from, let's say, Finnish to English or something like that. So I haven't combined a system translating between English to German and a system translating English to English.
Okay, right. Okay, good. Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so I guess ideally, these are the conclusions that I would have. First is that when you are evaluating metrics, also report results without outliers. And then when you are doing empty system development, then instead of BLEU, we can use metrics such as CHRF or EC or ESIM that are more powerful in assessing empirical improvements. And finally, I would say that once you have your final systems, then always support that with human evaluation. So this is in an ideal world, and so that is for people evaluating metrics, for people doing MT system development, but this is for everyone. Always visualize your data. You might be surprised by what kind of patterns you have that your summary statistics are not revealing. So in this example here, you have 2 points with a correlation of minus 0.18, and this is, when you actually visualize it, the points from this very interesting dinosaur, which this was generated by Alberto Cairo, and he calls it the Datasaurus. And so this is for everyone. Always visualize your data. So that's the end of my talk. Here's some discussion questions that I have. So as I said, I am organizing the metrics task this year. If you have any kind of ideas for how to evaluate these metrics, to me. And as I mentioned earlier, we have some kind of qualitative proof that metrics are wrong for good MT systems. If you have ideas for empirically proving this, then talk to me. And we saw a bunch of red dots and a bunch of like all of the errors that our metrics made. And maybe if this was 2013, we would say, oh, it's because our metrics are bad at evaluating rule-based systems. But now they're all statistical systems, neural systems. So what is it about some systems that metrics get them wrong? And the next point was that we saw that we have more errors with BLEU compared to other systems, but is it just because we are overfitting? So if the whole of the MT community switched from BLEU to CHRF, for example, will we have a lot more red dots with CHRF compared to BLEU? And I guess this is the last question, which is more a practical issue, which is that it costs money and it takes time to do a proper human evaluation. How practical is it? I mean, I'm saying from my high perch over here, everybody do a human evaluation at the end, but how practical is that? And what's the best way to do this? Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you everyone for listening. And now we move to questions.